Hello, it's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, a blow for the Chancellor as the UK's growth forecast for this year is halved. As Rachel Reeves outlines her spring statement and sets out a menu of economic reforms, there is a warning that global uncertainty fuelled by a trade war could derail the government's plans.
There are no quick fixes, but we have taken the right choices, returning stability to our economy after years of mismanagement by the party opposite.
To govern, Mr. Speaker, is to choose, and this Chancellor has made all the wrong choices.
And the cost of the Chancellor's cuts, welfare reforms, could push a further 250,000 people into poverty, 50,000 of them children. Coming up tonight, we'll be joined in the studio by two financial influencers and our very own Sky News Money Live reporter to find out what the spring statement means for you and your finances. Also ahead, the parents of Sarah Everard give their backing to a campaign group calling for tougher sentences for serious, violent and sexual criminals. Plus, Prince Harry quits as patron of a charity set up in memory of his mother over a dispute between the trustees and the board. And it's back to the classroom for Ed Sheeran as he teams up with pupils from his old school to perform in their orchestra. We'll be chatting to the head teacher and Ed's old choir master. All that's come and much more on the UK Tonight. Now, since the government came to power last year, their focus has been all about growth. But today, in her spring statement, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, confirmed the UK's 2025 growth forecast has been halved. Reeves said she was not satisfied with the numbers, as the Office for Budget Responsibility also warned her plan could be derailed by a global trade war. Well, the government's banking on planning reforms and welfare cuts to kickstart the UK's economy. But their own figures show an extra 250,000 people could be pushed into poverty, 50,000 of them children. Well, it's led to anger among some of the Labour backbenchers that the poorest in society are bearing the brunt of today's announcements. Coming up, we'll be taking a look at what this all means for you and your finances, with a series of household bills set to go up just next week. But first, our political editor, Beth Rigby, has this report.
If she's feeling the pressure, it doesn't show. A Chancellor in a very tight spot, but smiling still as she faces up to a government with less money and hard choices to make. This wasn't a budget, but it felt like it.
Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
Red pen all over her economic plans.
Now our task is to secure Britain's future in a world that is changing before our eyes.
More money then for defence, and no stepping back from her rule to fund day-to-day government spending from tax receipts, not borrowing, by the end of the decade.
I said that our fiscal rules were non-negotiable, and I meant it. I said it at the election, I said it at the budget, and I say it again today.
But since the election and budget, the economy's taken a turn for the worse. This, the hard truth.
The OBR have today revised down our growth forecast for 2025, from 2% in the autumn to 1% today. I am not satisfied with these numbers, and that is why we, on this side of the House, are serious about taking the action needed to grow our economy.
Growth down, debt repayment costs up, the Chancellor filling the black hole in her fiscal plans with a £14 billion repair job, including £4.8 billion of welfare cuts.
If we do nothing, we are writing off an entire generation. That cannot be right, and we will not stand for it. It is a waste of their potential, and it is a waste of their futures, and we will change it.
The harsh reality, 3.2 million families hit financially, losing on average around £1,700 a year.
These plans mean that welfare spending as a share of GDP will fall between 2026 and the end of the forecast period.
But the Chancellor at pains to prove her plan is working, and this rabbit of sorts had her beaming. The government's controversial planning reforms forecast to add nearly £7 billion to the economy.
The OBR have today concluded that these reforms will permanently increase the level of real GDP. That is the biggest positive growth impact that the OBR have ever reflected in their forecast.
This a Chancellor grasping at any good news.
Delivering security for our country and security for working people. And I commend this statement to the House.
A proud and pleased-looking Prime Minister, but the Tories pinning economic failure firmly on her.
This Chancellor constantly trying to blame forces beyond her control. The right response is not to duck responsibility, but to build a resilient economy. And now we are all paying the price of her broken promises. Today's numbers confirm it. We are poorer and we are weaker.
A Chancellor who raised £40 billion in taxes but 5 months ago at the budget, now coming back for more, this time in spending cuts. Is it time for you to level with people and admit that your plan hasn't protected them? And the truth is that you are going to have to come back for more tax rises or spending cuts in the budget in October.
We did have to make a number of difficult decisions on tax and welfare and on spending in the budget last year, but we have now wiped the slate clean. There's lots of speculation that I was going to change taxes today. The Tories were desperate to call this an emergency budget. It was far from it. We have found efficiencies in public spending.
So you're not coming back for more?
Well, I'm not going to write 4 years' worth of budgets. I've just delivered a spring statement today, but I think you can see through this spring statement how determined I am, how determined this government is to live within the means that we set ourselves.
But back in the House of Commons, the welfare cuts dividing the Chancellor's own benches.
Making cuts instead of taxing wealth is a political choice, and taking away the personal independence payments from so many disabled people is an especially cruel choice.
It is not right that disabled people and the most vulnerable in our society should pay for that.
This perhaps a sign of things to come as the Chancellor faces into the clamour of welfare cuts at home and a global economy packed with risk. Many noises off, and so much that could still knock her off course. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, amongst the hardest hit by the Chancellor's cuts are some of the worst off in society. Millions of families are set to have their welfare slashed in a move that the government's own impact assessment says will see 250,000 people move into poverty, including 50,000 children. Our business and economics correspondent Paul Kelso has been hearing from some of those concerned about the changes.
Firstly, I want to talk about how it actually feels to be reliant on support from a government.
Demonstrating in Leeds against welfare cuts being spelt out in Westminster. At their heart, changes to personal independence payments. Flick has been unable to find work for 4 years. She thinks she'll lose at least £100 a week.
I don't know how I will survive. I absolutely have no idea because I don't have any luxuries as it is. The whole point of personal independence payments is to fund the additional costs you have for being a disabled person. The government's got a funny idea about what incentivises people because, honestly, nobody was ever motivated to go to work or increase their productivity by being pushed into penury.
Welfare spending will take the single biggest cut to help make Rachel Reeves's numbers add up, and that will have real-world consequences. The government's own figures say 250,000 people will be pushed into relative poverty. Despite that, overall household income is forecast to grow, and that's not how it feels to people in the Chancellor's constituency. Pudsey is the place that's centre to Parliament, with a 12,000 vote majority from a suburb where growth is not a given. At the Pudsey Community Project, demand is steadily rising, the cost of living squeezing even those with jobs.
It's one of the reasons why our pantry and our food bank and our children's clothing use scheme all are 6 day a week, including evening and weekend opening, because we know that a lot of the people we're supporting are in work either part-time or full-time. Some of them, just the cost of living are outstripping what their employment can give them to get by.
Growth would fix a lot of the Chancellor's problems. For that, she needs businesses like this component engineers to thrive. But the tax rises coming next week make that hard work.
Considering we've had a pandemic, we've had Brexit, we've had global supply chain issues, the Suez Canal and a few wars just to throw in the mix, not to mention the political instability, we're doing okay. You know, we're holding our own with good, modest organic growth, and we're trying to stay positive. As we try and manage a business, if we're mitigating some of those increases in costs and some of the pressures around us, we're not focused on driving the business in really exciting, innovative ways.
In her constituency, never mind her party and Parliament, protests at the Chancellor's choices will continue. Paul Kelso, Sky News in Leeds West and Pudsey.
Well, it all feels so big, doesn't it, in terms of scale and numbers. We're going to get into this in a bit more detail to answer some of your questions about today's announcement and try and find out what it means to you. Here to discuss this, the spring statement, financial experts Abigail Foster and Cameron Smith, alongside our very own Jess Sharp, who reports for Sky's Money blog, that has been really busy today, reacting to the Chancellor's announcements and answering people's questions. Jess, people getting in touch with you on the Money blog, what have been the main issues that they've been addressing today after what they heard?
We've had a lot of people getting in touch because I think with this spring statement, a lot of it has been sort of macroeconomic and people want to know how it's going to impact them directly. The big issues that people have been bringing up with us is cash ISAs. There was rumours spiralling before the statement about the allowance being cut. That didn't happen today, which many people will be very happy about.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen, though.
It doesn't. Who knows what's going to come in the autumn? We've also had people asking about the welfare cuts and what that's going to mean for their benefit payments, pensions, interest rates and mortgages people really want to know about as well. Yeah, it's interesting. Cameron, Abigail, you've been contributing to the Money blog today, and I know a lot of your followers will have brought up similar questions because it's always interesting whenever there is a budget or a fiscal event, a statement, whatever the government like to call it, there are always so many more questions for people than answers. It feels like it unsettles everyone because we don't really get the detail, do we? Abigail, I'll come to you first. What are some of the main things that people have been asking you to explain from the statement today?
I suppose to understand what is the difference between a budget and a statement has been one of the largest parts, because we were all told that, you know, the spring budget was coming, and then very last minute, I think anyway, it was reformed into a statement. So there was no red box, there was no kind of pomp outside number 11. It was very much Rachel walked out with her binder, and very quickly after the Warm Up Act of Keir Starmer, she started talking about things like projections, the OBR forecast. So I think it was just the change, because a budget is when, obviously, they change fiscal rules like taxes and maybe bring in conversations like ISAs and mortgages.
It's a bit more tangible to people.
Yeah, there's something, and especially for personal finance, things happen, whereas the statement was very much kind of reporting, maybe, well, obviously there was a lot of discussion on welfare cuts and things like that, but mainly it was just the reporting of the forecast.
Yeah, we'd been talking a lot about welfare cuts before this spring statement, so again, that had unsettled so many people that would be affected by that. So many people still don't know if they'll be affected by that. They're in that sort of catchment group, but they don't know the detail. And also, Cameron, it's interesting to point out, isn't it, again, that the big announcement was that the growth projection for this year for the UK has halved from 2% to 1%. And again, people will go, well, that clearly isn't good, but what's the ripple effect for me sitting at home tonight?
So probably the biggest effect you're going to see is with interest rates. So with growth halving, I think the Bank of England are going to be influenced to cut the base rate or the bank rate even further in order to stimulate economic growth, so hopefully to combat that huge half in the growth rate. With that, we're also going to see, so we've seen that inflation has also dropped slightly from 3% to 2.8%. So that's another factor that hopefully is going to play into the Bank of England's decision to cut interest rates even further. So the Monetary Policy Committee are going to be meeting again on the 8th of May. and there's a lot of speculation, I know lots of speculation around all this kind of stuff, that they're going to be hopefully cutting the base rate from 4.5% potentially to 4.25%. So this is something that's the average person is going to see more in their personal finances, you know, the savings rates, their mortgage rates. This could mean that they may be earning less on their savings, but hopefully on the other side of the coin, saving money on their mortgage if they're on a variable rate mortgage or if they're coming up for a mortgage renewal.
Yeah, because Jess, again, you know, mortgages comes up all the time, doesn't it? And as we head into awful April, when your energy bills, your council tax bill goes up, we're going to be talking about that later in the programme, don't worry. You know, this comes right ahead of that. Mortgages people have been asked about. You mentioned pensions as well. It didn't get mentioned in the spring statement, but of course it's all related, particularly with growth. And you were talking about ISAs, this potential move from, you know, cash ISAs. Will they bring down the limit on that, encourage people to invest in stocks and shares? But a lot of people are concerned about that, because if you are lucky enough to have savings in this cost of living crisis, that feels like a risky move. But pensions people always see as something that's a bit more secure. What have people been asking you?
Yeah, so I think people just want to know what's going to go on with pensions, and there are lots of reforms that are still sort of being discussed. And Abby, you were sort of talking about that earlier, weren't you, when we were working on the Money blog, about how there might be a way to come up with a pension that also helps you invest so that you can help boost the economy whilst you're saving. So I think people just really want to know what's going to happen. Nobody likes uncertainty. No business likes uncertainty. No individual likes uncertainty. So I think that's where they're at with pensions. On the cash ISAs, there was a lot of concern that the tax-free allowance was going to be slashed down to £4,000, which, you know, some people would argue that will push people to go into a stocks and shares ISA, and then they will invest, and that will boost the economy, and that will be a great thing. Other places, building societies in particular, argue that slashing the cash ISA allowance will have a negative effect and will just harm savers. So there's still a lot to be discussed, and in the spring statement today, in the documents, it does say that it is something that the government is still looking at. So I don't think we can rule out any changes in the autumn budget just yet.
Well, yeah, that's something I've noticed with my followers. They've been asking me, what are there's all this speculation and uncertainty around cash ISAs. How's that going to affect me, who uses the cash ISA or perhaps wants to start using the cash ISA if something changes later down the line? So as we've seen, there was speculation that there might be a change announced in this spring budget, or I mean the spring statement, sorry, not budget, just to make that very clear.
Yeah, don't worry, the terminology's been all over the place until today. We're like, it's definitely a spring statement. That's what we're calling it.
Definitely a spring statement.
You're not the only one.
You know, that doesn't rule out any future changes potentially in the autumn budget, where they could reduce that threshold or the allowance from 20,000 to 4,000. However, it's very important to understand that this is only going to affect your annual limit, how much you can contribute per year, not how much you're allowed in the cash ISA entirely. So any contributions you make before any changes won't have any impact or effect.
The one thing the Chancellor did do today is double down on those welfare cuts. That doesn't seem like it's going to change. And as I said, unsettling for people who are receiving some kind of benefits. You know, what's the feeling? What's the takeaway from today?
I think the main takeaway is that it's not going to happen overnight. A lot of the changes, especially things like universal credit, you'll actually see an increase in April, 1.7%. But then there was that discussion around, OK, what comes next? And there's conversations around it rising by £775 a year by 2029, 2030. Well, we're in 2025, so we've got some time there. And I think when it comes to PIP, we were already planning. We already kind of knew this was coming because it got leaked. Well, not leaked, but it got explained to us before the statement. And I think that has actually, that's been quite upsetting, I think, for a lot of people, because it's still quite unclear what that means for everyone. Because I think those that don't, or they're saying that those with lower need for it might then miss out entirely.
Something that's been quite stark today from the government's own assessment of the situation is that, you know, 250,000 more people are going to be pushed into poverty, 50,000 of them children, which is a stark headline, but that comes from government information. And I know, Jess, so many questions coming in for you to the Money blog today has been, why is this Labour government taking from the very worst off in society and not doing more to tax the rich? And that is a question that comes up a lot.
Yes, it comes up a lot, and I think it comes up more when it's a Labour government, because Labour is seen as the party of the working people. So lots of voters get quite confused by the fact that they're making welfare cuts and not taxing the rich or increasing taxes on the rich. I think it's one of those issues that is quite complex, and there's lots of different trains of thought as to why that isn't happening. And we have to remember that the rich are being taxed. They're not living tax-free. But there is a fear that by increasing taxes on the rich, you're going to push them out of the UK economy. They'll take their assets, their wealth elsewhere. They'll take their businesses elsewhere, and that's ultimately not going to be good for economic growth, which is what this government is really pushing for.
Yeah, here's a thought, and this comes up in every budget that I cover, every fiscal event. What is there for small business? Because it's important to talk about what wasn't in the budget and what wasn't in the spring statement. A lot of small business owners will be looking at this today going, yet again, nothing for us. Cameron, I wonder if you've got a view on that.
Well, we're obviously seeing the national insurance contributions increasing for businesses, which is really going to be kicking in from the 1st of April, I believe. So, of course, that's not going to be nurturing any of those small businesses, and especially you're obviously going to... I feel like this kind
They're
of...
being told today, you know, not as much growth.
Exactly, and that's definitely not going to contribute to that factor, is it? Because we're going to... This increase in national insurance contributions is going to trickle down onto it. It may not be a tax directly on employees, but this decision will trickle down onto them, and it is going to impact their employability. It's going to impact the growth of these companies, whether they're increasing the salaries of their current employees or even increasing their employee numbers.
And Abigail, I'm sure you're hearing from small businesses that, you know, they want to invest, they want to take on more people, they want to take on apprentices, but because of the growth forecast, the national insurance, all the extra costs that are coming with being a small business now, they can't do that.
No, it's becoming harder
so
and harder. And even, you know, one of the pros or one of the positives that Rachel Reeves said today was national minimum wage is going up. Sounds great, right? For most young people, especially the apprentice rates going up, like all of those national living wage.
Entry level for some people. If they can't get into those businesses, it doesn't matter, right?
I agree, but also even with those rises, someone has to pay that. It's not the government paying the national minimum wage, it's small businesses. And so when the government implement these national minimum wage rises, the businesses have to be the ones that pay this increase. And so I would say, there's a lot of stress, and I think for small businesses it will be, maybe they start to look at investing in tech as opposed to employees, which, can be damaging for the future economy.
OK, AI, it gets into everything. We won't talk about that now. We are going to talk about Awful April a little bit later on in the programme. Abigail, Cameron and Jess will stay with us for that. Thank you for your contribution for the moment. Still to come here on the programme, we'll be taking a look into that because from the 1st of April, all your bills are going up, all your household bills. That'll be interesting. We'll discuss that next. And we'll also be talking about Prince Harry leaving the charity he set up in his mother's name, Centre Barley.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
You are not getting in this elevator, OK?
The judge made it very clear that she could see no justifiable reason why Sakulas wasn't here facing British justice.
I promised I would get him justice.
Free, wherever you get your news. This is what they're up against. The wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? This is the exact spot in Nottingham where their 19-year-old son, Barnaby Webber, lost his life.
I just think it's so cruel and so harsh.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
Sky News gets the full story first. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. It's legal to let go. Set the speed and take the hands off. It's almost driverless, but not quite. Hans is a highly trained police dog. The force is incredible. It's really frightening, actually. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Right, let's talk about awful April, shall we? It's fast approaching. Finance experts Abigail Foster and Cameron Smith are with me here in the studio alongside our own Jess Sharp, who runs the Money blog. You can see it on our website, skynews.com. I want to start with what I thought was one of those green shoots, a bit of a glimmer of hope in the Chancellor's statement today. And I wanted you to explain where it came from, because I couldn't find it in any of the notes. Where did real household disposable income will go up by £500 come from? The Chancellor said that, and I thought, oh, that sounds like a little bit of good news. Do we know where it's come from and what it means for people watching tonight?
I think it's a bit tricky, isn't it? And like the way that she's come up with that figure is based on so many margins that are very uncertain and not very tangible. I mean, I was quite surprised by the figure, and it is over the course of the Parliament. So that's...
it's not because it almost sounded like £500 a year, but that's not the case, from what we understand.
No, so from my understanding, so real household disposable income per year is expected to grow by 0.5% per year until 2030, till the end of Parliament.
OK.
So that's going to be helped by things such as wage increases and lower inflation. So, as we said, multiple margins there to factor in. Lots of ifs and buts and maybes. So, yeah, that's supposed to equate to a total real household disposable income of £500 per year. So, meaning there'll be £500 per year better off. That's how I understood it anyway.
Yeah.
But something that rung kind of bells in my head was that's £500 in 5 years' time. What will that actually be worth?
Yeah.
So at the moment, inflation is sat at 2.8%. So that's 0.8% above the Bank of England's target of 2%. So there's going to be a lot of factors at play there, where the Bank of England are going to be changing a lot of other factors to get that inflation rate down. And
we have to remember that OBR forecast today for inflation isn't good. They're expecting it to stay higher for longer. So the likelihood based on that forecast is that inflation isn't going to come down by...
OK, so what I thought was good news probably isn't, which leads us into awful April. Abigail, if you would do us the honour, the dubious honour of explaining what awaits people next month.
Yeah, awful April is because council tax, broadband, TV licence, everything seems to be going up. And it happens...
all at once?
Yes, all at once, and it happens alongside the new tax year. Tax year runs different to the calendar year, which I'm sure many people understand. So the tax year runs from the 6th of April round to the 5th, and so April just seems like the time when all of these companies, so the council tax, phone bill, broadband, can all just raise their prices. But it hits all of us all at once, and our wages aren't going up in line with that. And so, yes, this £500, was that green shoot of,
it's not dropping in your bank account on the 1st of April, is it?
It's not. And also the OBR said, it's not instant, and things might get worse before they get better. And I think that will be a sign in awful April, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's affecting everybody, no matter what your income is. This awful April is going to affect all of us. Cameron, I know as part of the Money blog you've been asked what are some of the ways that people can prepare ahead of this when it comes to their finances. So what can you say to people who are
I think energy bills
concerned?
are going to be a huge factor that are going to be increasing with the price cap increasing
meter
in
readings.
April.
You're always told before it goes up, do your meter readings.
So if you're already on a fixed energy rate, then you're in luck. You should be OK. You won't see an immediate change in your energy bills. If you're on a variable rate, you're going to see an immediate change in your rate. So in how much you're paying for your energy. So I think it's important that if you're not on a fixed rate or you think your fix may be coming to an end, it's definitely worth comparing different fixed tariffs with your energy supplier, or even switching to a different one entirely, because that's going to save you a lot of money rather than, you know, taking this big change head on.
Yeah. Council tax, you can't do much about.
Not much you can do about a lot.
There's the single element, because I came on a couple of weeks ago to talk about single tax, and yeah, you can obviously apply for the single occupancy with council tax. Don't forget that one.
Yeah.
Students don't pay council tax either.
Yeah. Trying to think of all those tiny cuts.
I mean, just don't lie to the council.
Yeah,
that's a recipe for disaster.
If you are living in your house on your own, your circumstances have changed, update it, right? Jess, what are some of the things that people have been getting in touch to the Money blog with concerns to this? Because we are still in a cost of living crisis and April is not going to help people.
Yeah, it's not at all. And I think, you know, people often, when we have inflation data out, people see that that's come down and interpret that as prices are coming down, and that's not the case either. You know, they're just rising at a slower rate than before. So the things that people have been getting in touch about, particularly broadband, mobile phone contract prices, and we're, you know, looking at ways that people can help bring those down. Haggling. Haggling with your broadband provider is proving to be quite successful, apparently. We've got some tips on that in the Money blog. That's been a big concern. Council tax been a big concern. I think also people are getting a little bit worried about income tax thresholds being frozen and getting a pay rise and then accidentally sort of being dragged into these higher bracket of tax.
Even the 100,000 mark, obviously 100,000 salary years ago was wild and great, but nowadays it pushes you into that kind of 60% tax trap, which means that you start to lose your personal allowance once you go over 100,000. And that kind of January to April bonus season, I spoke to a lot of my followers about, be aware, because once you fall over 100, you do start to lose your personal allowance. There's also other benefits you start to lose.
So what do you do then? Refuse a pay rise?
Well, there are things you can do, like, for instance, contributing to your pension to reduce your taxable income below that amount, or just being aware of it, I think is really important, because so many people are not, and things like your tax code will change once you start to earn over that amount. And I get so many DMs from people saying, my tax code's changed. I'm like, well, did you go over that allowance? And then they say, oh yeah, I did, that's why. So just being really aware and really on top of your finances, and just, the threshold freeze is frustrating. It's a bit of a stealth tax for sure.
Yeah, and car tax as well. If you're an electric
vehicle
driver, if you're an electric vehicle driver, you're now going to have to start paying car tax. And you haven't done before, so...
Well, if I recall rightly, that was something that came up in the blog, is that what does this mean by the highest historic tax burden in history? And that's just because the average person is paying a large percentage of their tax relative to their income, which just results in less disposable income in our economy, which obviously has all these knock-on effects. But those frozen tax thresholds that we mentioned just causes this thing called fiscal drag, where as inflation rises, as wages rises with inflation, you're just seeing more and more people pushed into those high tax brackets. And something that I learned that was really interesting is even with these new, the Plan 5 student loan, even if you leave university and you're on a minimum wage, you'll be paying your student loan from the day you start earning money, like regardless of what your job is, because your minimum wage will enable that. So, you know, just taxes all everywhere.
You cannot move for taxes and things going up. A final thought as our time together comes to a close. It's been a really busy day on the Money blog, so thank you for coming in to talk to us about what's been going on. But Abigail, a final thought from you in terms of, I mean, I'm not feeling particularly optimistic after today in terms of there doesn't seem to be any good news for people. So what can people do to take control of their finances? Because we hear that a lot, don't we? Making small changes. And I know that might feel like a mountain for some people at the moment because the burden on their shoulders is so huge. But what would be your advice to people to help them out of it?
My advice is always take in more education and take ownership of it. It can feel really daunting, like we say, like people come to me and say, oh, my tax code changed. And I'm like, well, the beauty is that you've taken ownership of your own payslip. So many people just completely avoid looking at theirs.
They assume that what's brown envelopes.
Exactly. They assume what's in it's correct, and that's not always true. So taking ownership of the finances coming in and then taking ownership of the finances going out. We've talked about haggling your in broadband, which
Shop
I'm going to give
around.
a go.
Can you still do that now?
Yeah, you can definitely shop around, speak, and just educate yourself more. Obviously, I think it is very difficult with all the kind of documents that have gone on today with the £500 and the miseducation. And I do personally believe as well that the way the Spring Statement's done in House of Parliament can make people feel really kind of removed from it because of the jeering and the panto that goes behind it. But actually be aware that the Spring Statement has huge impacts, and the autumn budget that will come from it, because Rachel Reeves did confirm we will have an autumn budget, there will be one fiscal conversation this year, that will impact you. So please don't put your fingers in your ears. Please open and be available to learn and understand how it impacts you.
Well, that's a really good and positive note to end on. Abigail Foster, Cameron Smith and Jess Sharp, thank you so much. The Money blog up and running, skynews.com if you want to take a look. And you can still send in your questions, can you, Jess?
I think so.
Poor Jess is thinking, I want to go home now. I'm a really busy day and I've just invited more questions. Oh, well, let someone else on the team take over. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Right, still to come here on the UK tonight, Prince Harry has said he is devastated. This is after he quit as patron of a charity he set up in honour of his mother. Also ahead, Sarah Everard's parents calling for tougher sentencing for serious, violent and sexual offenders. Plus, the University of Sussex hits back as it's handed a record fine in a row over free speech. We'll have the details. Welcome back. Now, Prince Harry says he is devastated and in shock to have to quit as a patron of a charity that he set up in honour of his mother, Princess Diana. Centre Barley was established to help young people with HIV and AIDS in southern Africa. The Duke of Sussex says he was forced to walk away following a dispute between the organisation's chair and its Board of Trustees. One of those trustees, who has also stepped down, told our Raw correspondent Rhiannon Mills that he didn't recognise the allegations being made by the chair of the organisation.
You can't underestimate the significance of Centre Bali for Prince Harry. So much so that it was at one of their events that he broke his silence in the week after he announced he was stepping away from royal life.
What I want to make clear is we're not walking away, and we certainly aren't walking away from you.
Now we know he's had to step away from the charity. In a joint statement with Prince Say-So, they said, "With heavy hearts, we've resigned from our roles as patrons of the organisation until further notice, in support of and solidarity with the Board of Trustees who've had to do the same." It's not clear exactly what's gone on, but Chair Sophie Chandauka appears to take a direct hit at Harry in her statement. She said, "There are people in this world who behave as though they're above the law and mistreat people and then play the victim card and use the very press they disdain to harm people who have the courage to challenge their conduct." We spoke to Dr. Kelly in Lesotho. He's been around since the charity was first set up, was made a member of the Board of Trustees a few years ago and has just resigned. The chair has made some incredibly serious allegations in her statement, including allegations of harassment, bullying, misogyny. As one of the trustees, how do you respond to those allegations?
I can honestly say, in my experience, in the meetings I was present in, there was never even a hint of such. The general tone and conduct of the board has been one of respect for each other, accommodating each other's opinions and inputs, and speaking with respect to each other. So this all came as a shock to me when I heard.
The charity is now being looked at by the Charities Commission.
All the trustees that were on his board were high-profile, high-achieving, very capable people. And it's extraordinary to see such a catastrophic divergence, putting the whole charity at risk.
But after what has been a turbulent 5 years, it is amazing when you think that the Invictus Games and Centre Bali were the main things that Harry had taken away with him. After giving up his military affiliations, his royal patronages, his royal duties, and some would say his family. The King and Prince William were out doing what the monarch and the heir should do.
These two don't do that much instructions.
Overshadowed yet again by someone who isn't a working member of the royal family. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News.
The parents of Sarah Everard have given their backing to a campaign group calling for tougher sentences for serious, violent and sexual criminals. Jeremy and Susan Everard's daughter was abducted, raped and murdered by then-serving Metropolitan Police Officer Wayne Couzens in March 2021. They say it is a relief to them that he received a whole life order, but they know other families who didn't receive this small comfort. Paula Hudgell, the adoptive mother of double amputee Tony Hudgell, is also part of Justice for Victims. Tony, who is now 10 years old, was assaulted by his birth parents when he was just over a month old in an attack that left him with multiple fractures and blunt trauma to the face that led to organ failure, toxic shock and sepsis. He was left untreated for over a week and eventually had to have both his legs amputated. Jodie Simpson and her partner, Anthony Smith, were jailed for 10 years for the attack. But Paula told our crime correspondent Martin Brunt the punishment doesn't always fit the crime.
Tony's sentencing at the time for his case was the maximum, which was 10 years. Since then, it has been raised with Tony's law, but 10 years and then only serve half a sentence. So within just over 5 years, they were both eligible to be released, which Tony will suffer for the rest of his life. He suffers daily, he has struggles, he can't be the same as his peers. So the impact on him and us as a family has been so huge that really the sentence doesn't reflect the crime that was inflicted on him as a tiny, defenceless little baby.
There are two initiatives at the moment that's looking at sentencing. The sentencing guidelines are
being considered. And the Law Commission is looking at the whole issue of murder and maybe dividing up different aspects of murder legislation. Why isn't that enough? Why is there more to be done, do you feel?
I think when you ask the general public whether sentences are lenient or are they strong enough, everybody, without doubt, will turn around and say that that sentence was not long enough that fits that crime. And exactly the same on Tony's. You know, anything that happens with Tony, all we ever get is, why only 10 years? Why only 10 years? So in murder, and when it's only and not a whole life order sometimes, you can understand why there's public outcry, because it just doesn't fit the crime.
The University of Sussex has been handed a record fine of more than £500,000 for failing to uphold freedom of speech. The higher education regulator investigated the handling of Professor Kathleen Stock, who resigned after being accused of transphobia. It said the university failed to uphold academic freedoms and that it could lead to staff and students having to self-censor. Sky's Alice Porter has the story.
She was accused of transphobia for her beliefs on sex and gender. Professor Kathleen Stock resigned in 2021 after protesters at the University of Sussex called for her to be fired. She was advised by police to have CCTV on her home. Such was the concern for her safety. Now the university has been fined after an investigation by the Office for Students.
We cannot have a sector where academics feel afraid to express their views. Said that, we did have strong evidence, not only from what Professor Stock said, but also from what we'd seen about the documentation and also how the policies have been adopted and the clear documentary evidence as to the processes for adopting them, that there were breaches of our requirements and that these attracted a fine.
The regulator's report said Sussex University's trans and non-binary equality policy statement failed to uphold freedom of speech and academic freedom.
Generally, what I find more worrying is when, institutions have sort of listened to the protesters and take that voice through into their institutions and then basically become propaganda machines for a particular point of view, and then everyone else in that institution feels they can't say what they want to say.
The Office for Students say the policy of the University of Sussex could lead to students and staff self-censoring. But people we've spoken to here say freedom of speech is protected on campus.
I definitely think that this university advocates freedom of speech a lot.
I think everyone does censor themselves a bit just because they want to respect other people's points of view.
A student and now I'm a staff, but I never felt that, freedom of speech is just suppressed here.
This is the largest fine ever issued to a university. Sussex Uni say the judgment is unlawful and will challenge it in a judicial review.
It makes it almost impossible for universities to have any policies that will control how people speak or relate to each other on campus. It's free speech absolutism, puts free speech above all else.
Championing academic freedom while respecting the rights of minority groups is a challenge for universities. This fine will certainly send shockwaves across the higher education sector. Alice Porter, Sky News.
So to come on the UK tonight, a chance to meet an old school hero. We'll hear how Ed Sheeran teamed up with a student orchestra to perform a concert.
I want to start the programme today with a name, a story that I can't get out of my head. The campaign has now started.
This is your chance. Tell people.
This is the Politics Hub. It's not correct. The tax burden is projected to go up.
No, I am talking about the...
No, but I'm not. This is my interview. Look, this is ridiculous.
No one does care about us.
I'm really interested in that. On the Politics Hub, he likes to push the boundaries. He's got the majority. The question is, what is he going to do with it?
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. No freedom! Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Hello, welcome back. Let's get the latest updates from Sky Sports News now with David Garrido.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
I woke up around a little while ago now. It's around 5 o'clock, so I'm about to have some suhoor, which is the last meal that we have before fasting for the whole day. I got some electrolytes to keep me hydrated throughout the day, and then some vitamins. So I need to make sure that I eat right because we got a match later on in the day against Blackpool. It's currently like 10:50. I'm about to leave my house, make my way to my friends to get a lift in.
Baba, assalamu alaikum. How are you? Very good, thank you. Thanks so much for having us here at Nottingham Forest today. Well, we're going to be following you in terms of how you perform at such a high level while you fast. So we can't wait to find out a bit more. But as we kind of walk, what's the first thing on your agenda today?
We just got a team meeting, pre-match meeting before the game, just to see like the lineup and stuff like that.
Today we'll be really clear. We don't want anything to come through our shape. Scotty, you do front zone. Bubba, you do your normal one. Gio, you be in line with the post in the front zone.
Your captain as well, leading the team today. How are you feeling just generally about, just being captain?
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Now, for something I'm sure will draw envy from classrooms across the country, Ed Sheeran teamed up with pupils from his old school for a concert on Monday. The singer performing his hit Perfect with the orchestra at Thomas Mills High School, where he used to be a student. It was part of the school's 45th anniversary. Well, I'm joined now by the school's head teacher, Flip Hurst, along with William Saunders, another of the alumni from the school who was invited to perform with the orchestra, and also Ed's old choir master. Hello to you both.
Good evening. Good evening.
Well, Philip, what a cause for excitement this must have been amongst the students at the school when Ed and, of course, William were invited back to perform.
I think for the school and for the whole community, Suffolk is very much community focused, and it was just an amazing event at a wonderful venue called Snake Maltings.
How did this come about? Is Ed quite easy to get hold of when it comes to returning to Ipswich, where he grew up, and particularly the school that he attended? How much does he keep in touch with you?
He does keep in touch with the school and particularly his former music teacher, our director of music, Mr. Hanley. But of course, he's been busy on world tours and recording.
Yeah, he certainly has, hasn't he? And he's got an eye for talent, so he could be looking at a few of those pupils as potentially stars of the future. Because, William, you also attended the school. You were Ed's choir master, I understand, Ed in the local choir along with his brother. Did you spot his talent back then?
No, not at all. Nothing gave it away to what he was going to rise to, unfortunately, at that point.
So he can. What was it about him that didn't stand out? Could he not hit the high notes in the choir?
No, he was very proficient, but there was nothing that was going to give it away. He was committed and what have you, but nothing that told us that he was going to be one of the world's greatest pop stars.
Yeah, and he probably quite likes that, doesn't he? He comes across as someone that's very normal and likes to blend in, and but he has this extraordinary talent that came through hard work. And I understand that he was mingling with pupils and parents after the event, and he signed some things for your daughter. What did he say to you about returning to his old school, William?
He was very down to earth, genuine, pleasant chap, fully supportive of all the wonderful work that goes on at the school, but also just normal, which is so refreshing for someone who is so talented.
Yeah, global superstar returning to the school where it all began. And Philip, I wonder if I could ask you, Ed Sheeran has written an open letter to the Prime Minister calling for immediate long-term funding of music education in the UK. He says that as an industry, we bring in £7.6 billion to the economy, yet the next generation is not there to take the reins. Do you agree with Ed that music is seen as undervalued in schools? It's not being invested in?
Totally. I've been in education for 30 years. I've worked in different local authorities. Music education's been dismantled. We have loads of statistics in education. It's very much about measurement, and the system never seems to measure the arts or music, and it is exceptionally valuable. And personally, I think Ed has underestimated how much music is worth, because I think it not only contributes to the economy and jobs, but well-being. Those students, not all the students in the orchestra, have well over 100 on stage, alumni. Not all of them are going to go into music careers, but they've got a hobby for life, and just the boost that's going to give to their communities, their lives. We're throwing this away, and it seems absolutely ridiculous. So I fully support Ed, as you'd expect me to, and we will do whatever we can in our school to not only keep music alive, but to make sure it thrives in the years ahead.
Yeah, and it sounds like Ed Sheeran is supporting you in that. William nodding along there. Thank you both for talking to us on the UK Tonight there. Philip Hurst, head teacher at Thomas Mill High School that Ed Sheeran used to go to and goes back to support. And William Saunders is former choir master and former alumni. Thank you.
Thank you.
A quick look at the weather now.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Cooler and more unsettled to end the week. England and Wales looking mostly fine and warm again tomorrow. Before then, most places fine this evening, but the far northwest will be wet and windy. Northern and central Scotland and the northwest of Ireland will see outbreaks of rain moving in overnight, clearing northern Scotland later. Most other places dry, breezy and fairly cloudy, but expect some drizzle on western coast and hills. Mild generally, colder in the clearer, calmer south with a local frost and some fog likely.
The perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.